And one of the things about Great Big Sea, I think we've been, the fans love, even though we've been derided a bit critically, is that we've tried to make it fun. And, you know, when people come to our concerts, we want them to have fun.
Bob Hallett has been one-third of Great Big Sea for almost 20 years. The multi-instrumentalist and singer also produces records for other groups, has written 2 textbooks on language arts, and he's written about life on the road in a book called Writing Out the Notes. In the middle of Great Big Sea's most recent tour, he sat down with me in front of a very appreciative audience. Bob, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your childhood in Newfoundland, because a lot of the musicians that of my vintage whose lives I've read about and everything, guys like Van Morrison or Bob Dylan, were first exposed to music by listening to what was very often a remote radio signal. I mean, Van Morrison in Belfast was listening to, you know, Radio Luxembourg and the Armed Forces radio in Europe, and Dylan was listening to AM stations in Duluth, Minnesota, and stuff like that. And for you in Newfoundland, it was almost exactly the same thing, wasn't it?
No, actually, it was almost the opposite.
Really?
And that Newfoundland was so far removed from any outside media world that, you know, we lived in a really self-contained environment in that regard.
So you were getting nothing?
Well, we got lots of radio, but it was very heavily tuned to a Newfoundland audience. So radio stations in Newfoundland played a tremendous amount of Newfoundland music. So we grew up in an area, and you know, and it's still the case now, where Newfoundland music. Well, let me put it another way. So much folk music in the world is subjected to a kind of tiny corner, you know, and it's sort of hidden away. It's like that's some stuff that some hippies listen to, or it's an ethnic thing that people do on Sunday mornings in a church basement, you know, where traditional music in Newfoundland was part of the popular music environment. Right. So it was there with country music and rock and roll, and it wasn't embarrassing or old or weird. It didn't have to be revived, you know. It was just there. In fact, we didn't make that distinction. It was just part of the music that I knew growing up.
So, and you've talked about and written about how in your family it was part of the fabric of the family, that music was just a natural thing. It was just a natural form of expression for everybody.
Well, people sang and played at home a lot, right. And part of entertainment was and is in Newfoundland. You know, I grew up particularly in that environment, but that wasn't, you know, very unusual, and it's certainly not unusual now. When people came to our house, they would play and sing. And my parents would play and sing all the time, so it wasn't remarkable. Now, I mean, they didn't necessarily think of what they did as traditional music. They didn't make that distinction. They would sing hymns, they would sing Elvis songs, they would sing very, very old ballads. But it was all the same to them. It was just music, it was stuff they liked, and it was entertaining. Yeah. And what was really important at those events was not what you did so much as that you did something, you know, that you contributed to the evening's entertainment. And being good at it wasn't important. What was important was that you participated.
Yeah. And for you, what was it? Did you? I mean, if music was part of it for you, what form of expression did you want that to take? What instrument? Were you thinking in terms of an instrument, or were you just thinking of music in general?
Well, you know, when I was younger, I was just trying whatever instrument I could physically manage. I was trying to learn. And then as I got older, I was drawn to traditional music because I liked the melody side of things, and the traditional instruments that were available to me, like the accordion, the fiddle, and the various whistle stuff was. Were all melodic, you know, as opposed to a guitar, which is, right. You know, the strummy thing. And not to use a non-technical term, but the end result of that, though, was that after a while I got kind of drawn to the magic of it, you know. It was traditional music had the ability to kind of put you in a different place, you know, and it was very obviously ours, you know. It was something that I had that no one else had, or, you know, at least looking at a national thing. And that's what really attracted me as a teenager. It's like, if I learn how to do this, this will be really special. I might be the only one out there into this, but this is going to be really special. And, you know, the rebel in me, or the person who wants to do something different, was drawn to that in particular.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the rebel in you, because at one point in the book you talk about a Halloween costume that you wore once, which seemed to me to indicate early on that you were a little bit outside the pale.
Yeah, well, I went to a school where you know, at the time, all schools in Newfoundland were religious, and there was 3 strains of schooling, and depending on your religion, and regardless of how apathetic your parents were about the religion, that was the school you went to, and there was no argument about it. So, I mean, everybody in my school had essentially the same cultural background as me. But as a way to pull the chain of authority there, on the school's dress-up day, I dressed as Jesus, complete with robe and crown of thorns. Which went over very badly.
I wonder why.
In fact, I remember my mother crying, so she was so upset. She's almost always problematic. But the reason I put it in the book is a couple of years ago, there was some kid in the U.S. that had gone to school dressed as Jesus, and he'd been subsequently been on Oprah, and now he's got a book out.
And then,
yeah, for me,
he ripped you off.
I got kicked out of school, and my mother cried. You know? No book, no Oprah.
Now, you have already, it now becomes obvious to people who are watching us on television that there's a live audience here. You've already told them this story, but I'm going to get you to tell just a little bit of it because it leads into something else. Because this is about the time that you discovered the Bay City Rollers, which is a very big deal for you. And I should say that I did bring a CD that we were hoping to play before this began that had... well, I won't tell you what was on it aside from the Bay City Rollers, but there were some other things on there. Black Flag was on it and a couple other things. But tell me about the Bay City Rollers and what that meant to you and where that took you musically in your life.
Well, I mean, I think it would be hard for me to connect a chain musically from the Bay City Rollers to what I do now. But, you know, the spirit of the Bay City Rollers is what I love. You know, the fact that it was an unabashed pop band. You know, they weren't trying to evolve. They weren't trying to make a concept album. They made albums for teenagers where everyone sang along and everyone clapped, and the lyrics were really simple. They weren't simplistic, but they were simple. And they had just this tremendous gimmick. And, you know, they really introduced a whole generation of teenagers to an idea of power pop. And the idea that pop music should be fun. And one of the things about Great Big Sea, I think we've been, the fans love, even though we've been derided a bit critically, is that we've tried to make it fun. And, you know, when people come to our concerts, we want them to have fun. We don't want them necessarily to walk away with a big message or to have had some profound experience. We want them to walk away feeling a little bit happier about their lives or having gone to something and felt like they left a really good party.
Well, one of the things you mentioned about this, and I think this is interesting, you talked about how there was about a 5-year lag time in Newfoundland for everything else that was going on in pop culture. And I'm wondering if maybe that is not a good thing, because you come to these things after the frenzy is over, and it somehow makes it different. Would you not think?
Well, it made it none of it was important by the time it came to us, you know, and everyone knew that, you know, we were getting stuff at the bitter end of its rejection. But you know, so what? Like, it was still fun, and because of that, and the way that music worked in my community, it was all good, you know, and people just liked stuff they liked, and they didn't worry about what was fashionable or what was important or what was going on in Toronto or New York or L.A. They didn't know anyway. So what became important was just whatever was interesting to people at that moment. And it was a very eclectic environment to grow up in. And as an artist, everything was good. You know, just do stuff people like, you know, which is a great lesson to learn as an artist. You know, it might be too commercial for a lot of people, but I would rather people like me than not like me, you know, and that's kind of been the aesthetic, you know, going back to the Bay City Rollers and everything that happened subsequently.
Yeah. All right, tell me about punk music, because that was a big influence to you. You actually got, and in fact, I have a quote. I've got to read this quote. You wrote in the book, "I kind of wonder how I ended up in the small punk scene that thrived in St. John's during the 80s. Where I lived, I was pretty much a one-man fan club."
Indeed, yeah, no, along with my Jesus costume being the only punk in school did not lead to great sexual opportunities, let me put it that way. But I was always a guy who was like, you know, whatever I'm doing, I'm committed to 100%. And the punk thing, I thought, well, if I'm going to buy the record, I'm wearing a costume. And
what was the costume? How'd you dress?
Well, certainly nothing has changed in the subsequent 25 years. There was a lot of black, which again was unusual. My haircut was significantly shorter than any other guy in the class who hadn't had brain surgery. And I really distinguished myself by, you know, sort of pushing my taste on people too in an awkward fashion. But, you know,
any piercings or anything, any of that stuff?
No, well, that would have been a lot of work at the time. I had my ear pierced, but, you know, whoopee. But a piercing then would have required, I would have to get like a veterinarian to do it. You know, it would have been a really, that would have been so far beyond the pale of acceptable behavior that my parents would have had me committed. Like, that would have been no possible scene would encompass the fight and the row that would have caused in my house.
You had a band called The Reckoning, right?
I did, yeah.
And you were about playing a gig at was it the Grad's Bar?
There was a graduate residence that had kind of a very not legal bar, and they would do all ages shows, you know. And my band, The Reckoning, played. It was our first and only gig, really. We played this 4-band show, and the evening went famously. We'd rehearsed 9 songs, and we went over so well that we did them all twice.
You had an original.
We did have original, yeah. It was about Brian Peckford, who was a politician at the time.
Yeah. What was the chorus?
I'm sad to say I've forgotten the verses because I think they would be illuminating. But the chorus in the fashion of the day was, Brian Peckford, Brian Peckford, Brian Peckford, go to hell. And then
lyrical mastery.
Then we
and you did that twice.
We repeated that. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
The first verse was, you think this only happens in El Salvador? A dictator is living on a closer shore.
Whoa.
Yeah, I can't remember the rest of it.
Wow.
And the melody is also.
Wow.
To a degree, there was one has departed from my brain.
And there was a bit of a brouhaha.
There was a brouhaha. Well, there was a pool table in the room that was effectively the centerpiece of the show normally, and it had been pushed to the side. But in an effort to one of my young compatriots to swing on the chandelier, and took a leap off the pool table. But in doing so, he put his foot through the felt and right through the pool table, and instantly the lights are on. Who's paying for the pool table? So I was like, whoa, just look at the time.
But you guys were getting picked up by somebody's parents.
Yeah, someone's dad. Well, we put all our gear out on the sidewalk, and then we just kind of huddled there, hoping that no one was going to ask us for our $10 or whatever, to pay for the pool table. That was the end of the reckoning. It was after that the guy whose father came to pick us up heard the story, and he was unimpressed, to say the least, and thus brought. He wasn't the other guy in the band wasn't allowed to come play with me anymore.
All right,
it was just me and the drummer then, so it was kind of.
Let's talk about the beginnings of what became Great Big Sea. How did you hook up with these guys? Talk a little bit and getting into that music. Going back.
Well, I knew Sean in high school, and we were in university at the same time, and our love for this music was drawing us to a pub called Aaron's, which wasn't particularly Irish, but it was where there was a growing interest in playing traditional music, and it sort of goes in waves, but a bunch of younger guys were trying to find other younger guys to do something. And I knew Sean, so the circle of people were hanging around his bar, getting up on talent nights and playing informal sessions and that. He was one guy that I kind of knew. So we said, well, we're going to start a band together. At that time, we had no instruments, no PA, no songs, no nothing. But, we had that desire. And we started a band called Rankin Street after the basement apartment where we were domiciled. We found a wide variety of people who passed through that band over the next 4 years. A list of characters I wouldn't begin to recount, all of whom were deeply flawed and problematic in many ways. And the longest survivor of that was Darryl Power, who became the bass player in Great Big Sea subsequently. But after 4 years of that, and very tumultuous years too, which involved on more than one occasion fighting with the audience, fighting with each other, more drunken raucousness than I can remember.
When you say fighting with the audience, you mean physically fist fighting with the audience,
yeah.
Right? As opposed to having a disagreement.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, kind of political disagreements. No, it was. Several incidents stand out. One of the fights was started because we bought this PA system on a whim one afternoon. We never had a PA. We'd never use this junk from the bar. We'd be renting guys who robbed us or setting up stuff we didn't have a clue how to do. So we met this PA salesman at a bar, and he's like, "You should come up. I got this PA. You can buy it on a layaway." So we had like this 11-year loan. We're going to pay $5 a month for the rest of our lives for this huge PA, and we didn't even have anywhere to. I remember like putting it in a cab to take it down to the club. Anyway, we set it all up, and we were hours. Of course, we had no idea what we were doing. And the salesman came in and said, "Well, you need sticks or something to put it on, or posts or stands. You can't just lay it on the floor. It's too low. No one will hear it." And we're like, "Oh, well, what do? We got nothing. We don't have any stands. We got no money. We just spent it all on this PA." So we went out in the back room of the club to see if there were some tables or chairs, and we found all these big 2-4 cases of beer. They're waiting for the beer guy to come collect the empties. So we created this huge pyramid of beer cases on either side of the stage, and we laid the speakers on top of them. These things weighed a ton, like 300 pounds. And halfway through the show,
oh no,
one of the case of beer fell out, and like the PA picked over, beer bottles went everywhere. And, so the clubs were all full of people, and everyone got hurt, and they were blaming us, not unreasonably. And a guy, there's a guy, and I'm not a violent or aggressive or a difficult guy, but this guy poking me in the chest while we're playing. He's like, it's your fault, man, you shouldn't have done that. It was stupid. It's like poke, 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 They'd come back and poke me some more, and like the 5th time around, I was like, I'm going to hit you if you poke me again. And he's like, oh yeah, poke, poke, poke. So now we're having a wrestle amongst the beer bottles. All the band are like, oh man, this career sucks.
When you were with Rankin Street, how far afield did you go when you were playing?
Oh, nowhere, man. It was there was like 9 pubs, and we went around on a circuit. Sometimes on the same day. And various elaborate plans for touring would be hatched, and then things would happen. Someone would break up with their girlfriend, or someone's car would break down, or someone would get fired. Someone would get into a row with their parents and have to move, And there was always these little domestic things would interfere. And after 4 years of that, we knew this is stupid. We've amassed this huge audience in this tiny little place that's miles from anywhere and nobody cares about. And, we're doing this thing that could be really cool. We've got this sort of pop Newfoundland thing going, and it's really aggressive, and the kids are really getting it. We're not, all the other bands are playing for our parents, we're actually packing this bar with young people. But this vehicle we have sucks, we have this stupid PA that none of us know how to run, and we're, we're throwing beer bottles at people. This is crazy, we need a structure. And so I remember we sat down and had a meeting, and all the other people in the band had kind of faded away, and myself and Sean and Darryl said, okay, first of all, we need another guy, it turned out to be Alan Doyle. And now we need a plan, no more of this pub thing, no more crazy 5 a.m. nights, no more fighting with the crowd and each other. We need a plan. So we literally stopped that band and changed the name and took 6 months off and made a record and wrote out this big business plan, in March we're going to tour. Where and how and who we didn't get that far, but we had a plan. And so, that really, after that, it was, learn as you go.
Yeah. How was that? Talk about reception outside of Newfoundland to that music.
I'm thinking apathy is the word that
was
leaps
it?
to
Really?
mind. Indifference. Well, the first couple of years, the whole Ashley McIsaac Rankin family thing had not burst forth the way it subsequently did, so we were a bit of the voice crying in the wilderness, but the people who saw it always got it. And if we could get 30 people, when we came back 3 months later, there were 60. That's a hard way to do it. But, the same year that we gradually, started touring across Canada, and we did that immediately. We knew we couldn't spend the rest of our lives drinking ourselves to death in St. John's. What we did was, we were able to take advantage of a sudden interest in music from Atlantic Canada. And because of that, we were organized, and we already had tour, we already had a record, we somewhat had our shit together. We were able to, get signed by Warner Music Canada, and all of a sudden then we had this huge promotional muscle behind us that we never would have accumulated on our own.
And did that change things?
Yeah, overnight it went from here to here, just because, a video was this impossible thing. Now nobody plays music videos, but at the time, Much Music played videos 24 hours a day, and they needed Canadian content so desperately they would have played almost anything. Even guys who were doing this weird thing with fiddles and accordions. And, we were able to, it was kind of a bit of the right time, right place. Yeah. It was also, we kind of worked ourselves into that right place. So, some of it's serendipity, but some of it also is, we were willing to kill ourselves.
You write in the book about, and I thought this was interesting, about how you struggled with sound and with your instruments, because you're playing these acoustic traditional instruments in a lot of ways, but the way you're playing them required huge amplification for those people that were coming to see it.
Well, yeah, the instruments that I played were played in people's houses. You know? And if they were played professionally, it was done, in a really haphazard manner where nobody really cared about the sound or anything like that. Where we were competing with rock and roll bands. We were trying to play big festivals in situations where we needed to be loud. We needed to be loud as a rock and roll band. Mm. And a lot of that volume comes from, big drums and big amps and big bass amps, all this stuff that we didn't have, And, the instruments that we play, the acoustic guitars and the bodhrán and the tin whistle and the accordion, fiddles, they're not meant to be played that loud. They don't have electronics on them. They're not heavy. They don't stand up to it. So, we spent years, deafening ourselves in the audience trying to find ways to make this stuff loud without making it unbearable for all concerned.
One of the things you wrote about that I thought was really interesting in this regard was you talked about playing the bouzouki and how you were struggling with something, and then you heard a Byrds song? The Byrds cover of
Yeah.
Bob Dylan's
Yeah.
My Back Pages.
Well, I mean, the bouzouki, you know, when I bought it, I mean, I'd seen guys in Ireland playing, and I thought, okay, this could be, this solves the problem. I have this little tiny mandolin, which just sounds so plinky-blunky and it's driving me crazy. I'll get this big mandolin, and that'll be so much better. And, but, I mean, I didn't know what to play. I knew how to play it, but I didn't know what to play, so I'd find something to play in the band that made it better, and you know, it wasn't just kind of noodling around. And the thing with the bouzouki is it has 8 strings, and they're done in octaves, like a 12-string guitar. So you have a high string, a low string, and a high string, and a low string. And it creates a sort of harp-like sound. But that wasn't helping. Then I just stumbled across on the radio one time. I heard this song by the Byrds, and all the Byrd hits sort of share that same idea, this kind of little rolling riff that's played on the 12-string guitar, and I thought, you know what, I could do something like that on the bouzouki. And in fact, I took the riff exactly and played it note for note from the song My Back Pages, and it became the hook for the song Consequence Free, which is, you know, still one of Great Big Sea's biggest hits. And I'm unabashed about saying that. I mean, that's where that idea came from.
Yeah.
But for us, it just revolutionized our sound, because all of a sudden we had an acoustic instrument that was an acoustic instrument, and it sounded like that, and it fit our kind of Newfoundland Celtic thing, but it could also be plugged in and played through these huge PAs and sound like something.
Wouldn't it be great if no one ever got offended? Wouldn't it be great to say what's really on your mind?
I want to ask you about, because you write about this, and I know you've talked about it before too, but about the individual songs and how they affect you. And you write in the book, and this is very true for all of us, that, you know, certain songs at certain times will always bring back that time or that circumstance, depending on the intensity of the emotion at the time and all those sorts of things. One of the songs that you talk about is the Verbs' Bittersweet Symphony. And there's a story around this that I want you to tell. But you talk about this as being the link, the song that Richard Ashcroft wrote that he never got a dime for. I was thinking of it as you talked about the Byrds ripping off the Byrds, because he was ripping off the Stones, and the money all goes to them. It doesn't go to him. But this particular song carries with it a moment for you of a German tour you guys did in 1997 that sounded just like hell on earth. Talk about it.
Europe has often been problematic for us. I'm using that word too much, but it's an important element of what we do, is things going wrong. And our first German tour, we'd never been there, and, you know, it was European tours and were very novel and exciting. And we had this opportunity to open for a band called Delamitri, who at the time were big rock stars in Europe. We thought, well, this is going to be amazing. You know, we're going to go to Europe, and it's going to be huge crowds, and this is a dream come true. And, you know, we'd entered into this with an unreasonable amount of naivety. Anyway, when we got there, Delamitri hated us. The crowd hated us. Their crew hated us. The promoter hated us. Their label turned out to be complete fiction. The whole thing was a delusion, which we'd entered into. So, you know, 2 days in, much of our conversation was, this is your fault. No, this is really your fault. You were the guy. And so...
and you're in Germany, too.
We're in Germany in this little tiny van, and we don't know anybody, and the food's terrible, and everybody hates us, you know, so the morale is pretty low. On the 4th day of the tour, we're late, and we're driving through the Black Forest en route to Frankfurt. And the van, we're driving along, and we're late, so we're driving too fast. We're in the inner lane of the Autobahn, pulling this huge trailer stuffed with gear. And we're in this little tiny van, and we're all like that, you know, and we heard this, like, gung noise in the engine, like a real, like someone pulled a plug. I was sitting next to the driver, a guy named Tony, and I was like, Tony, man, that sounds bad. And he's like, I don't know, man. And then instantly, poof, like shrapnel flies out the front of the engine, big puff of smoke, gone. And we've destroyed the van. And so we kind of slow to a halt on the inside lane of the Autobahn. You know, it's flying past us 160 miles an hour. We're like, we're going to die here. We've got to get this van off the road. But it's really heavy, and we've got a trailer. So all hands are out, and we push the van and the trailer across the Autobahn, down the shoulder. Meanwhile, it's like the Maseratis are whistling past our pants, you know, into the way. And we push this very heavy van and trailer down an on-ramp to just the side of the road, and we're now in the middle of nowhere, like we're in a woods in Germany, with a broken van, and everyone hates each other. Yeah. And now we're really having a discussion about whose fault it is. Anyway, we eventually, after much sign language with farmers, this guy shows up in a big, huge flatbed truck with a uniform on, that, like a AAA kind of uniform. And we all stand, he opens the thing, and we all stand and look, see, what's he going to do? Is he going to, some magic's going to happen now, and this problem will go away. And he turns to us, and he goes, Das Wein ist kaputt.
Know what that means?
Right on. They're like, what are you going to do? You can't leave us here. You can't leave us here. We're holding on to him. Like, please, save us. We can't walk. We're doomed. And he says, no. And he tips the flatbed up and drags van and trailer onto the back of it. He throws 2 pieces of what appear to be wool over the van and ties it on. And we're like, well, where are we going? You can't leave us here. And he's like, that's van. Go. Gate. So we all get in the van. We have nothing else to do. And he appears to tear out, and he just tears off through the forest and through these little villages. It was like a ride in Universal in Florida. We're pulling out of the seats, and we're literally going past these windows, with the flower boxes and
on the second floor.
On the second floor, and women wearing dirndls are like inches away from us, as we tear through these villages, and dogs and children are running out of the way, and we're knocking over markets. It's like a chase scene in a European comedy. And we're all like, we're going to die. Like, we're going to, any second, this piece of wool is going to break, and we're going to tip over. And
you're on your way to a concert, too.
Right, yeah, which, supposedly we're on our way to a concert. Anyway, he abandons us at a Honda dealership that's having their grand opening in this town. None of us ever heard of it. And the Honda dealer is, to say the least, unimpressed with our appearance. And it's his grand opening, and it's, there's nobody there. And he has a cake and some punch. We just send on the cake. So now we've been hours standing around the forest fighting about the van, and we're starving. So we eat all his cake and drink all his punch, and then we just sort of loll around his showroom. All these, smelly guys, and he's livid, but he can't kick us out either. So if he finds what used to be known as a festive in Canada and Europe as a fiesta, 2 Ford Fiestas. And we take all the gear that we can stuff into 2 of those, and there's 6 of us, so we're 3 abreast. One guy's actually sitting on the hump, between that was a coveted position, I'll tell you, between the gear shift. And the trunk and the back seat are stuffed with gear, so every time we stop, all the gear hits us in the back of the neck. And we drive this way to Frankfurt, and, and we feel like we've abandoned our van, all our clothes, everything, just drive with the gear. Like, we're going to make the gig, man. The show's going to go on. Anyway, we get there, and Delamici are like, you fellows, you're here. Okay, well, I suppose you can play,
And where are they now, these bastards?
Crowd hated us, nowhere to change. We've abandoned all our clothes and stuff in the Black Forest at a Honda dealership, and we're playing this horrible gig for anyone. And after that, it was, morale was as low as could possibly go.
And the song?
And I walked to a bar because I was so pissed off at everybody else, I was going to kill them all. And I walked to this bar and ordered a beer. And, it was sort of, it felt like I'd gone into someone's basement and ordered a beer. That was the kind of vibe it was, where the 6 guys have been there forever sort of looked at me like, who are you and why are you ordering a beer here in our bar? And I sat there and I drank, and I thought, I'm going to drink another beer here just to piss these guys off. And the song that came on was the Bittersweet Symphony by the Verb, which is a beautiful pop song, one of the greatest pop songs ever. And it just completely transformed my mood. And I thought, okay, this is obviously a series of terrible decisions that we've made here that's led to this point, but it can't possibly get any worse. And the song transformed my mood, and it still has that effect on me now. It's a beautiful song, and whenever I hear it, it makes me happy, despite the unpleasantness of the circumstances.
I want to thank you for doing this, Bob. It's been great. I could talk to you for days.
Thanks
It's
a pleasure.
It was
Thank you all
fabulous.
for coming to listen.